What is going on, guys? We have another playable character. You would never believe it. In this sea of non-playable characters, we've seen so many people out there walking around, looking at their phone, staring at the screen, can't think critically, can't do dang near anything for themselves, can't think at all and outsource all of their thinking. We found another playable character, and actually it's a second go around for Mr. John Haar. He's one of the smartest people in the space, another one of those people that is on the younger side and just beginning his public persona into the sound money world and the freedom and the free market capitalism world and liberty world. So I could not be happier to have John on again, and we're going to be diving into more deep topics as we go on. Please let me know what you think about this episode, what else you would like us to dive into in the future, and I could not be more honored to have John on again as truly one of the smartest and like I said, on the younger side of the playable character generation that is coming up, that is going to change everything. So please enjoy, and please let me know, and John, what your thoughts are and what you'd like to see us dive into in the future. Enjoy. Mr. John Haar, thank you so much for joining me today. Part two on what we have already talked about, probably part 2 of 5 or 6 at least. We got a lot of good topics coming up here that we were just kind of going over. So thank you, sir, for joining me today.
Great to be here, Brandon. Yeah, we've got so much to cover. This might turn into like a Harry Potter series type thing. We might end up doing 7 or 8 or something. I don't know.
I mean, I will say internally, it's selfishly a little bit. I'm gunning for Breed, Love, and Sailor a little bit. So I know we're not on that level, people. But hey, it's we can dream, right? So cool. Today, let's roll into. And last time we talked about, for people that are watch part 1 or will eventually, or you're just stumbling on it now, go back and watch part 1. Just getting into more of your background, just a really interesting background, coming from Wall Street, growing up, East Coast, growing up, and then working in Wall Street. And then really the aha moments leading into sound money, but then eventually Bitcoin and what you're doing now, Swan, Bitcoin, and going to there. So check out part 1 if anyone hasn't seen that, or go back and review it and kind of see that, because we're going to kind of build on that a little bit today. And then some of the stuff you've been doing recently, obviously, going to the MicroStrategy conference and some of the banks failing, stuff like that. Talk about commodity money and credit and what's going on there. And in your article too, that again, people can go read that. We'll link that in here, but people can go read that and check that out, because it's a phenomenal article. And honestly, it hits home to me. I mean, we get along really well. We're similar, kindred spirits, but it just to me, understanding money and like getting to the basis of those things, again, teaching this in school. Why are we not? We were just talking about this, right? And teaching our kids these things and setting them up for life and setting people up properly, I think is huge. And that article that you wrote there is a huge piece in that, not for a child necessarily, but for an adult, to someone looking to learn and see what's going on. Boy, oh boy, it's really one of those kind of pillars into, hey, you need to read this, you need to understand something. There's a handful of articles, that's one of them, to understand what's money, what's going on in the world we're going to enter. We're going from that inflationary world to the deflationary world. So honestly, wherever you want to start, we can start rolling the MicroStrategy stuff, banks failing. Where do you want to roll, brother?
Yeah, man, let's start with MicroStrategy, since that was like topical thing, was just there last week. It was an interesting experience. So I'd be happy to dive into some of the takeaways from that conference.
Love it.
So yeah, they call it MicroStrategy World. And I don't believe it happened for a few years because of all the nonsense with COVID that was going on. But as many people know, MicroStrategy has kind of become known as a Bitcoin company, but they were not always a Bitcoin company. The BI, as they would call it, business intelligence, data analytics, that is what they do as a company before Saylor ever got into Bitcoin. And they actually have, a very successful business there. And they have tons of corporate clients who are, Fortune 500 big name companies that use MicroStrategy's products and services. So that was kind of cool just to see firsthand that even before Saylor got into Bitcoin, they had this very successful BI data analytics type business that they do, enterprise software. This is not a world that I know deeply, but that whole type of world, MicroStrategy is a pretty big name there. So that was cool to see. It was also cool to see how Saylor has kind of made MicroStrategy also a Bitcoin company, and a Bitcoin and a Lightning company, which I'll get into in a little bit. But that was cool because he's kind of normalized Bitcoin to many people who
Yeah.
otherwise would not have even thought about it. And I think we're still in the early stages of that. It's not like everyone at the conference was totally orange pilled. I'm not trying to say that at all. There were, quite frankly, plenty of people who were just there because they have a job as business intelligence data analytics at their company. They work with MicroStrategy, and they were at the conference. So it was not like a Bitcoin conference where everyone, is self-selected to attend a Bitcoin conference. They're,
Hmm.
basically orange pilled, or they're with a friend who's orange pilled. Um, so there were plenty of people who were not like deep into Bitcoin. But I don't think there were many people at this conference who were of the mindset like, oh, Bitcoin's a joke. They were all at least somewhat open to it, to talking to us we had a booth, the Swan booth, talking to people about Bitcoin for themselves, talking about two people who wanted to integrate Bitcoin into their business. Had a lot of high quality conversations with people looking to do that. And then obviously the conference itself, content wise, while I did spend most of my time at the Swan booth, I got a sense of the content being discussed. And one of the big takeaways, and Saylor has, talked about this before, but a good analogy is you think back to the early 2000s or late 90s, and the people who kind of saw how big the internet was going to be. We all now know in hindsight that as a company, you had to have an internet strategy. You couldn't decline to integrate the internet into your business. Um, and we know that in hindsight, right? That's obvious. But if you would have told someone that in the year 1999, 2000, 2001, hey, you have to have a strategy for integrating your business to the internet, many people would have said, I don't really think so. The internet is, yeah, some
So
people use
true.
the internet, but it's like, not going to be this huge thing. And now we all
Proven.
know it. Yeah. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. It's
Looking at
just,
you, Paul. Yeah.
it's just a fax machine. What's the big deal here, people?
Uh,
Um,
he
but
gets his beat up in the Bitcoin community so much. It's just hilarious.
oh yeah, and you know what the funny thing is about him? He's been like a whipping boy for the Austrian economics
Yeah.
community. So even before I
And
heard
for
of
the right
Bitcoin,
and politically, yeah, yeah, yes.
yes, well, and quite frankly, I believe he kind of deserves. If you were
True.
to
It's
read,
deserved.
it's deserved. If you were to read that guy's Twitter feed, and you just like had his name blacked out, most of the time you'd be like, oh, this guy's like a political strategist. He's just trying to
Yeah,
score
it's a
points
political
for like
hack or something.
his
Yes.
side.
Yes.
And then
Yes.
you wouldn't even think he's an economist based on a lot of his tweets. It's crazy.
That's a brilliant point. Black out of the name. I love that. That's so true.
Yeah,
Oh
you'd be
man.
like, oh, is he just a talking head for like a
Yes.
political show or something? Like,
Yes.
I think it makes him lose tons of credibility too. But that's just
Yep.
me.
Well, and to your point, that's why he's become a whipping boy. Like because it's like I don't know, things like that happen to people like you. You constantly attract that stuff because you keep saying ridiculous things. Like that's period.
Yeah, it definitely
Uh
invited for sure. So yeah, so we were talking about Krugman because he kind of had the famous line about the
yeah.
internet not
Yeah.
being more impactful than the fax machine or something. And that was kind of normal back then. And we look back on it and laugh. And Saylor's point is that he believes that businesses will not be able to just say, oh, I'm going to ignore this whole Bitcoin and Lightning or whatever scaling solution that ends up being successful on Bitcoin. He believes that businesses won't just say, I'm going to ignore that. You're going to have some sort of Bitcoin strategy, and that could take a bunch of different forms. It could be part of your treasury is going to be held in Bitcoin because cash is just this depreciating asset. It could be that you want to pay some of your employees partially in Bitcoin as a perk to retain them, kind of like matching the 401k bonus type thing. Or it could be some employees want to get paid 100% in Bitcoin and you need to have that as an option. It could be integrating Bitcoin into payments, accepting Bitcoin as payment for goods and services. It could be you want to pay certain vendors in Bitcoin or like. I think we're in the early stages of this, but all of those things are going to become more and more common as time goes on. And I think Saylor will be proven correct that businesses won't be able to just opt out and say, I'm going to ignore this thing.
Hey, really quick, I want to annoy the hell out of you with a quick little break to just remind you that we have to share the signal within the noise because the algorithms hate truth. The algorithm hates truth. So we have to do all that we can to spread the signal. The faster we do that, the quicker change comes to the world. We need to be the change we seek to be. What are we doing? What am I doing? What are you doing to build a future? Also, if you want a written version of a lot of what we do here, please go to the description and find the link to our blog, our Substack, as well as you will see many links to either the work or the companies, the places you can find all the playable characters here that we talk to and how you can connect with them. So now back to the show. Thank you.
It really is fascinating, just what he's doing. You know, you look at, and speaking of that, what did he do? So I'm trying to think. I heard him like a week or two before, I think, his conference, and I watched some of his that Natalie had done on with him, his interview. But I think I only got to like halfway through it, so I still got to watch the other half of it. But you know, just simple stuff like the email and turning that into his email, turning it into a Lightning, a channel. I forget exactly what he had done, but basically making all of it Lightning compatible, everyone's email in MicroStrategy and stuff like that. And so I'm curious what he said about that, or what was kind of talked about there with that kind of stuff, but also what else was talked about, because I just saw something as well that just made me think of this, which was yesterday someone was talking about going, like Aldi, for instance. Aldi, where you have like you put a quarter into your cart, like why wouldn't that be a Lightning QR code? Whereas a deposit, a quarter, like who carries quarters? So like I tweeted at Aldi yesterday, and I got this because someone had talked about a QR code, and I don't know where this was, but I think someone was trying it somewhere or something, or they were like suggesting, why don't you have a Lightning QR code on the side of the building, like the pay as you go thing, where you put a deposit down or $5 or whatever it is, and then you have to go into the grocery store, and then it doesn't let you out unless you scan your QR code to get your Lightning payment, your payment back, your $5 deposit or whatever, once you leave the store and you make sure you have what you need, or else you're locked in the store. Like, unless you have, so it was making me think of like, man, we just don't even know. And I think Bob Burnett as well. And I'm going all over the place a little bit because I just saw something he said as well. But again, truth, like Bitcoin reprices everything, and especially truth. And we can't even comprehend all the things it's going to reprice and everything it's going to do. It's not just money. It's like we all get into Bitcoin. It's like, oh, it's just an investment, right? Like, oh, it's this thing, it's going to make me some more fiat. And then you realize, obviously, that Pandora's box of like, wow, it's like, that's like the least of all this, like what it's going to change. So anyway, to all that, comment on any of that, but also like kind of what was talked about at the conference in terms of that, like from the email, him changing that all the way to like, what else were they talking about with Lightning and kind of how it can integrate with stuff.
Yeah. So I put all of this under the category of micropayments, but not, I mean, in order for something to be a successful micropayment, it has to be fast, cheap, and easy. Yeah, fast meaning like instantaneous, because micropayments didn't really work well in the legacy financial system. And this is even something that I believe Satoshi wrote about, if not in the white paper, probably not in the white paper, probably just in the talk forums. But Satoshi said something along the lines of micropayments don't work because there's all this overhead that banks have, and they don't really want to send these like they don't want to be bothered by this. They just don't have the infrastructure for it. It doesn't make sense for them. But there are actual use cases in society that micropayments are really, really beneficial for. I mean, you just gave a simple one where, instead of having the quarter at Aldi for your shopping cart, some sort of Lightning payment. The reveal at MicroStrategy World was that they want to do something where every employee, as you suggested, has a Lightning address and is like linked to their email, I believe, just so it's super easy for people to know where to send sats if they need to. But part of their idea was that corporations can send sats via Lightning for incentivizing and rewarding certain employee behaviors. And I think this is not necessarily the type of thing that every company in the world is going to roll out. Maybe some companies, it doesn't make sense to incentivize your employees like that. But other companies, I think it absolutely will make sense. And this is only one application of micropayments. There's you can get creative. There's so many more, but one I think that's huge is in the world of content production. We kind of have all become used to the idea that you have to have a subscription to buy something, to read something, to watch a video, certain things behind paywalls like that. And you have to like sign up and you're locked in for a month or a year or something and it's like a real dollar amount. It's like $15 or something like that. And it makes kind of people choose this binary situation. Like I'm either a subscriber or I'm not. Whereas with micropayments, you can have things cost like a certain number of sats, like fractions of a penny. And to you, the consumer, it's totally reasonable. You'll be like, yeah, I'll pay, a fraction of a penny to read this article. But to the person who wrote it, if they get thousands and thousands or millions of people to do that, then that actually adds up to a real number. This is the idea of zaps on Nostr. People are actually getting sats sent to them for content that they produce. This actually it may seem like a small point, but this is a game changer. Podcasts as well. People could say, stream sats to me as you listen to this podcast, rather than say, hey, you've got to pay me $30 a year in order, and then you get everything. You can just choose one podcast. And then as a person, maybe you streamed $1, maybe you streamed 20 cents or something. Again, I think, people probably get the point, but this is actually a big deal because that kind of infrastructure was just not available until something like the Lightning Network, which allows for fast, instantaneous, cheap, and easy micropayments.
Yes. Yeah. What's really funny too, and it's the whole NFT crowd, the crypto crowd. It's funny because a lot of what that crowd tries to be or is kind of going for, Lightning solves a lot of that, right? Like it is that in a way, right? It enables that. You need Lightning to be able to do these things, and you have all these different arbitrary, whatever cryptos and all these different things claiming or trying to do a lot of this. Where Lightning is just simply now a couple years in, it's just solving those problems. It's just going, well, here it is. Like it just enables a lot of that, which ironically is what I know many in the Bitcoin crowd have kind of said of like, yeah, those are just all kind of like side projects that will eventually all just collapse onto Bitcoin, right? Which is that's what my belief. I think everything will just kind of collapse into Bitcoin, the black hole of Bitcoin over time, as those are just kind of training or proving grounds, whether they know it or not. I think a lot of them don't know that, right? But they just eventually are, and it just gets sucked into that world. It just makes me think of that. It's really, really interesting. Do you have any thought on that? Just kind of like that larger aspect of all that, of those side coins and just kind of what's going on in that ecosphere?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point. And I think that is one of the ways to potentially look at altcoins and other crypto tokens and projects as not being all bad. This is a generous interpretation.
I think you and I might have talked about this before, possibly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of these things where I am a true Bitcoiner. I think the point of Bitcoin is to bring about sound money. Right. It's to instill honesty, transparency, and fairness into the monetary system. And I think that will have far-reaching consequences into other parts of our society and our lives. That's why I'm so passionate about Bitcoin. So I'm not a fan of these other crypto tokens, to be honest. I just don't think they even needed to have a token. A lot of them don't need to exist. They're pump and dumps. They're flawed designs. Some of them are outright scams. I don't have many good things to say about them. But if there is some interpretation you could give them that's not all bad, I would say it's that it's like let 1,000 experiments play out. And the ones that actually maybe make sense, there's use cases, there's real demand for something. Maybe it can be done using Bitcoin. And obviously it has to compete with the monetary use cases and all that kind of stuff. But if there's something that people are experimenting with on another chain, and then they actually do need a token and the token has monetary value, I think it will end up migrating back to Bitcoin because Bitcoin will be the best blockchain with the highest settlement assurances. And if you really do have a monetary use case, why would you want to use something else other than Bitcoin? So I think, it's one of those questions. If something else is being done elsewhere, you always have to ask yourself, is this going to migrate back to Bitcoin? And if I think if there is a sustainable use case for it, it most likely will migrate back to Bitcoin.
Yeah. And not to go too far down this road. I mean, I couldn't agree more, but it's any person who is putting real wealth into something, unless you're Vitalik or unless you're, Hoskinson or something like that, where you're like in control of it and the centralized authority of all these coins and you're the one controlling it. I don't know anyone with real wealth. It blows me away that there are, I guess, some people, there are some, whether it's endowments or as you've seen in some pensions or people in the past that like put real money, like considerable amounts of money into there. And there's no telling what's going to happen. You have to, the robustness that Bitcoin contains is the reason that it will be here for decades, in hundreds of years, and it makes it the obvious choice for that. Even if you're going to say, and what I'm getting at is, even if you're going to say, hey, I want fractional shares of this real estate project, a REIT, in the Wall Street world, right? But it's like they're trying to do it in the crypto land. How do you know it's going to exist in 5 or 10 years? Like that might be the greatest idea on earth, and like that's great, and like it might work for a year, but will it be there in 5 years? You have no idea because of the centralized nature, and that's where it's like it's lost on me. Like so many people get caught and lost in the weeds of like, well, yeah, but like this is so amazing. We're gonna like fractionalize this, and artists are gonna be able to have like a 10% royalty and everything. It's like, cool, that might be great, but it ain't gonna exist in 5 years. Like what does it matter? Like 100% of zero or 1% of every little piece of something, that may be great, but it's not going to be around in 5 years or 2 years or 10 years. So what does it matter at the end of the day? I think that's where it's like just this constant band-aids on bullet holes society we live in, of like trying to like deal with 10th order effects instead of like just dealing with root causes. And like, guys, we got to fix the money, to your point, right? Like it's being a Bitcoiner first, then all these other things can come from that, and it's built off of Bitcoin in that system somehow, some way, in different layers, whatever it looks like. But it doesn't matter. None of it matters until Bitcoin is the system. So I think that's a great point. Well said and just articulated by you. I'm glad that you said that. So before you comment on any of that, or we can kind of pivot a little bit. I know we kind of went through the MicroStrategy stuff like that, and get into a little bit of the current day kind of banking situation a little bit too, of what's going on there, talking about things collapsing, whether it's crypto and all that stuff, and finding the solid ground of Bitcoin. I think this is a fascinating juxtaposition to me of having that sound money, having that concrete, that Bitcoin is, and having the auditability and the precise issuance we noted is, compared to the banking system, which is itself a Ponzi, and having these regulations so regulated, but they don't tell you the one regulation you need, which is, oh, hey, we go take your cash, we go lend it out to everyone else, go gamble it and buy up other assets. And like the only regulation that they should tell you is the one they don't tell you. So now it's coming to a head again. Give us your macro kind of on what's going on here. Get as macro and micro as you like, but just I would love your take on just kind of what's going on with everything. And because you're brilliant in this area, and I love when you're in spaces talking about this stuff and kind of leading the spaces. It's always fun listening to you kind of go down these rabbit holes.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I did write an article just recently called "The Banking System versus Bitcoin," and I think we just made this public on Swan. So I'm just pulling this up right next to me here. But yeah, so to highlight a few things here, as the name implies, banking system versus Bitcoin, this is covering all the different things that have been going on recently in the US banking system, including 2 top 20 US banks that have failed to some degree. And there's obviously other banks that have failed or wound down operations or went into receivership. Each situation is always a little bit different, but no one is denying that, multiple bank failures have happened in the US now in the past few months. And I actually think what's interesting about this is there's at least people are at least on the same page about there is an obvious problem now. And because banks have failed, but it's interesting to point that out, because Bitcoiners have been talking about sound money, and even Austrian economists have been talking about sound money for decades. But there are points in time, like you told someone in 2017, 2018, 2019, hey, there's these huge problems with the monetary system. We need sound money. You tell someone that, they would kind of look around and be like, what are you talking about? That, 2008 thing happened. Yeah, that was a financial crisis, but Janet Yellen just told me we're not going to have another financial crisis for the rest of our lifetimes. So that 2008 thing was just a random occurrence, and it's, the system's really fine. That's actually what the mainstream view was. What I think is interesting about this year is that when you have multiple banks failing, including 2 in the top 20, no one can hold that view anymore. Even the mainstream people are like, okay, something went wrong here. Now, that's where the agreement unfortunately ends, I think, because, and this was the point of the article, was that the responses to the banking crisis are wildly different. And I'll just name what I thought were the 3 like major buckets of responses, and then maybe we can chat about them and dig into them.
Yeah.
But I think the first major response is the same system, but more regulation. And the people who support this believe that the system can be managed to the extent that banks failed, which they obviously have now. We just didn't have the right regulators in place, and we didn't have the right rules on the books. And if we just get smarter people and smarter regulation, we will manage this system and we won't have bank failures in the future. That's their belief. Number 2 would be a new system with near complete government control. And I believe we talked about this last time, because there's a woman named Saleh Amarova, who was the Biden administration's appointee for head of the Office of Currency and Comptroller.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she ended up not getting the position, but she's interesting because she was, recommended for it by the Biden administration. And she has some very, very extreme central planning, borderline socialist views about the monetary system. And her view, and she articulated this on a podcast recently with Joe Weisenthal and Tracy Alloway of Bloomberg. Her view is that you replace accounts that you and I have with a retail bank. Instead of the retail bank owing us our deposit, the Federal Reserve is now our counterparty. So as you can see, this is basically just getting into, this is the path for Fed money, Fed coin, CBDC, whatever you want to call it. And I will say something that probably sounds crazy at first. I can see where this view comes from, in the sense that if you're going to believe that the financial system is going to get constantly bailed out, and all these, and we make up numbers and we say 250K is the limit. And if you're above that, you're uninsured. And if your bank fails, you lose. That's the rule on the books. And then the day the bank fails, everyone gets protected. So if we're just going to keep bailing out the system beyond the rules we have on the books, I can kind of understand that these people are saying, okay, well, if the government is really the backstop, then let's just make the government the counterparty. Like, they will issue the money. I get where they're coming from. Obviously, I don't think that's the right solution, because you just introduced a million other problems about the government now being the direct issuer of the currency. But that's the second response. And then the third one is Bitcoin, which I'm not going to describe in detail, but that's obviously a different situation, because the proponents of Bitcoin want to get the government and the banks and human judgment out of the monetary system entirely. That's obviously the solution that I support. But I just I know I threw a ton of information out there, would love to hear your views, but I think it's just interesting to see how now everyone agrees there's a problem because banks are failing. And we're probably not even through that, right? There's more regional banks that are down 90% to start the year. Their stocks are, they're not out of the woods by any means. So everyone agrees there's a problem, but you have these 3 buckets of solutions that are wildly, wildly different. And it's very interesting to see people make their case for why they think which one is the best solution. And I obviously believe Bitcoin is the only one that really addresses all of the problems that we care about.
Yeah, well said. First off, a couple of things. I took a couple notes on that. So Amarova, I find it fascinating. And I remember being in a spaces, I don't know, a month or two ago, it was, a couple months ago or something, and just saying, the powers that be hide things in plain sight. And we might even talk about this on one of the ones you were hosting actually. And things are hiding in plain sight. And this goes back, for a long, long time. Intelligence communities, everything. The Paris Air Show, the new Messerschmitt 262, the first jet, fighter aircraft was at the Paris Air Show. Like it's in plain sight. They hide things in plain sight, and before that he would even fought and stuff. So it's really interesting because everyone's always like trying to look for under the bricks and like around the corner. And it's like, no, they just hide things in plain sight, especially when the lies are big enough, things are big enough. So you look at like Brad Sherman, as I just made me think of Brad Sherman this week. I mean, just absolute clown world. Tell me you're highly regarded without telling me you're highly regarded. I mean, mind blowing. Amarova herself, it's fascinating that she's gone. Usually, like a lot of times, like it's kind of like, okay, I'm kind of like out, but like isn't it crazy how she, and what I had said a couple months ago was just watch for this lady because she's not done. It was my point. Like everyone thinks like, oh, we won, like sound money. Like we won, we kicked her out. Yeah, we got her out. It's like, she ain't going nowhere. Like that's the end game. Like she will be, she's there lurking in the shadows, and it's not her. It's this mindset, right? It's this illness. It's the drinking at the chalice of satanic currency. That's what we have chosen over and over again as a society. Bailouts and pay my debts off, pay my student loan debts, pay my mortgages, all these things. It just will continue to cascade, and this will continue. We'll keep going down this road till we get to that end game, like you just said, which is Fed money, Fed CBD, CBDC, central bank digital currencies, whatever. And so here it is, Amarova. I didn't know she was with Weisenthal, which is hilarious in and of itself, doing a podcast. It's like, how are these creatures just like, you just get booted and then here she is, like here we, because they piecemeal these things together, right? Like evil doesn't work in the sense that like you just defeat it and it goes away. Like, oh, it's like I got some Lysol wipes and it's gone, like no, like it's always there lurking. And I think the problem, I believe the problem with good is that we constantly just think like we won a battle, and it's like, okay, on with my life. Like I don't have to pay attention for politics for another year, another 4 years. And it's like, that is the problem, where we're never diligent enough to continue this. And that's where Bitcoiners, I think, ultimately have been like, okay, got to fix some money, because you can't red versus blue. Like we could fight till we're blue in the face until we kill each other. And that ain't going to fix a thing. So in saying all this with, Brad Sherman and all this stuff, which you can comment on that too, what I'm interested in is how many more do you think will fail? Banks or countries, everything. I mean, like this seemingly like they want to keep elongating this, or that these higher rates for longer, or whatever they're going to be doing here, maybe the rest of the year, 6 months, who knows? And just high in general. I mean, they can't just drop them 5 or 500 basis points like tomorrow necessarily, unless things collapse. But how many things are going to collapse the longer this goes on? Like you said, there's already a bunch of bank stocks down still, and to this point they haven't even collapsed yet. So what's going to happen there? What are your thoughts on countries or banks or other things that choose to drop still in the coming months, coming quarters here?
Yeah, I would be shocked if we saw the last bank failure at this point, especially with where, as you alluded to, interest rates are where they are. That is the main problem at this point in time for the banks. They bought a bunch of securities, made a bunch of loans at certain interest rates, and those are their assets. And when interest rates go much, much higher, the value of those assets go down. And you get pressure on your deposits, because people might pull deposits because they want to go get the 4 to 5% that they can get elsewhere. Plus, if they hear that the bank is risky, then you just get deposit flight, not because they're looking for better rates, but because they're just worried that the bank's going to fail. So you have these kind of combination of problems. I'd be shocked if we've seen the last bank failure. I think it's interesting if you think about it from the perspective of the powers that be, which, it's multiple people. It's the Fed, it's Yellen at the Treasury, it's other regulators, it is Congress people, it's the administration, all of them. And you could get into details about who thinks what, and there's obviously going to be nuances there. But I think generally speaking, the people in the federal government, let's just call it, they are okay with banking consolidation happening.
Yeah.
And I think this is a little bit of like a controlled demolition type thing, where are they thrilled that there's headlines in the news about bank failures and bank runs in the United States? No, they're not really thrilled about that. But and especially I should
they don't want panic. Yeah.
They don't,
That,
they don't want panic
leaving
and
completely. Yeah.
exactly. And they don't want bad publicity. They don't want to have to answer tough questions. And speaking of tough questions, I'll highlight this because it was just amazing. In February, there was a presentation given to Powell by other members of the Fed, and they specifically highlighted Silicon Valley Bank. At that point, Silicon Valley Bank had not failed. That was in March. They specifically highlighted interest rate risk that banks were facing, and they named Silicon Valley Bank as a bank that was facing significant interest rate risk. I mean, there's a page dedicated to it in the presentation, and the someone at the Fed ended up doing a report after Silicon Valley Bank failed, and they found this presentation that was given to the Fed on February 14th. So they just said, as part of this, the Fed was alerted to this. Someone actually raised the exact concern that ended up playing out. And Powell's response was, oh, that was that was just one page of the presentation, and we thought it was for informational purposes, and rather than something that we were supposed to take action on or something like that. And you just have to ask, like, this is the person who's supposed to be seeing this stuff, and someone put it right in front of him, and he's like, oh, I thought that was just informational. Thought you're just letting me know that this. I don't know what he thought. It makes no sense. And how many pages did it need to be? 12 pages. And if it was 12 pages, he would have said, oh, now this is no longer informational, or would he have said, no, all 12 of those pages were informational? It's crazy. It
needed to be pictures and charts and graphs for him.
What more do you, I don't, this brings up a bigger philosophical point. If I was in college, when I was in college, financial crisis was happening. That's kind of what led me to look elsewhere for answers. That led me to Austrian economics, sound money, the gold standard, and then Bitcoin. If in an alternative universe, if Hank Paulson and Ben Bernanke at the time, if they saw the crisis happening and they steered our economy the other way and we averted crisis, maybe I would have said, oh, this is great. We have these central planners watching out for us. But time and time again, it just keeps happening in the complete opposite. I don't know how many times we need to be smacked in the face and told these people are not capable of centrally planning the system.
Dude, thank you. I tweeted something the other day. It was, I don't even remember what it was, but it was something about like, how many times do you need, or how many, I don't know what it was, how I phrased it. It was like, how many pieces of information, how many times do you need to get punched in the face until you realize you're in a global information war, right? But I can't remember how I used it. It was smarter than I can think right now, fortunately. But it was just like how, and that's where I come back with all this. I'm really glad you brought that part of it up, because every time you go down these roads, you just ultimately get led to the final logical conclusion, but all these conclusions of like, these people that are leading us, bureaucrats, politicians, they're either completely incompetent or it's a plan, it's an agenda. And when you realize there are really smart people, like there's a lot of people that have way more education than I do. So it can't be that they're dumb people, right? So then it logically means, okay, it has to be the other side, which is there's a plan. And then once you realize it's a plan, then you have to start going down that road and starting to understand the plan, which is this controlled demolition, centralization of things, which is unfortunately the Communist Manifesto, right? One of the 10 planks, central banks, controlled chaos in a way, right? For lack of a better phrase. So that way the 1,000 people that run things can have what they want to have, quite honestly. And it's a whole different topic to get into a different day, which we'll get into some other parts, but there's only logical conclusion you can come to once you start checking off the boxes and saying, well, these people aren't dumb. They're all Ivy League educated, right? They're all very smart people. So this doesn't take rocket science to figure out what's going on. So I think it's really prescient that you bring that up, really an important matter to point out to people, because there's clearly something else going on here. And the average person has no idea. A quick side tangent, again, like one of my brother-in-laws, this came up to me like a year or two ago, and he's like, Brandon, I used to think you were crazy, but I love you, but I used to think you were a little crazy. And now he's like, now I get it. I see. Like, I just thought that like our government, like people just like had our best intentions at heart. And I was like, I know, don't we all, don't we all? Like, I would love to believe that. I'd hope to believe that, but that's just not the case. It's not how the world works. It's not how governments work. And that's what our founding fathers knew. Like, they knew that. That's why they designed the country in a certain way. And they work at the consent of the governed. That's how the governments are supposed to work. And we've completely flipped that on its head. And now we're reaping what we sow of, you know, the end game of you'll own nothing and be happy, et cetera, because we've made ourselves scared of government instead of the government being scared of us. So, you know, you could go on tangents about this. And again, please, you know, comment on any of this. But I think this is super interesting because the next part of that is I want to ask you, how much part of it was how much the debt needs to still roll over. So before we go into that, anything you want to say on any of that? I know I just kind of rambled on and went on a tangent, but
no, I think that's great. And yeah, a couple things come to mind. You know, you said your brother-in-law said, oh, you know, I kind of just assume the government has our best intentions at heart. And I think, you know, one, I think there's plenty of evidence that they don't have the best intentions at heart. But when you get into some of this stuff about controlling the monetary system, they need to have not only good intentions is not enough. You know, there's the saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. That's a saying for a reason.
yes,
These people could have good intentions, and maybe Jerome Powell does have good intentions.
Yeah.
Yep. That's not enough. They have to not only have good intentions, they actually have to have the capability to manage the economy and to magically know what interest rates are supposed to be and set them right at the right level. I put it in quotes
for 8 billion people. Yeah.
For 8 billion people, there's no such thing as the right level of interest rates and the right supply of money. That is something that the market needs to figure out. So yeah, even if they have good intentions, which I don't believe many of them do, they need the capability. So it just, when I look at that and I say, okay, you're basically wanting them to be like these omnipotent, it's the idea of a benevolent dictator. And you know, there's a reason that those don't often exist in society.
Yeah, well said. And it's funny because I truly believe that most politicians go in, and really on all sides, I think a lot of them go in with actually good intentions. I actually do believe that. And because I believe most people are good. I believe 99% of people are good, and people are used. I think it's a very select few people that are able and you know, inspired in a way. I hate using that word, but like they have evil intentions and they know how to manipulate. And then it's easy, right? You know, Jesus you know, there with the devil, and he's like, hey, you just do this and I'll give you the world. And it kind of all human nature is like that. I always joke about like Dan Bilzerian. It was like, you know, like that's easy to be Dan Bilzerian. Like I you know, it's kind of weird to talk about, but it's like just to do whatever you want as a male, as a guy, like just to do whatever you want. And like, yeah, that's easy. It's really easy to do, like, oh, I'm gonna do whatever I want to be super successful. And like, look at Tiger Woods, like, you know, cool, do whatever you want. But it's like the challenge in life to me is to be a good human being. And I know that can be subjective in a way, but like to have this life where you're trying to live within yourself, where you're a master of yourself and you're disciplined and a controlled agent for good, like controlled chaos in yourself, where you're a master and disciplined yourself, where like I'm going to lead this kind of life and be successful at the same time. To me, that is one of the greatest challenges as a man, quite honestly, is to do that and to harness some of those primal nature that you have, and to say, hey, I'm going to do this and channel this for good. Because any one of us can just go out and do whatever we want. And like, oh man, I've got like 10 girls and like they all, you know, it's like, it's a little different. It's just like, you know, so not to take it down crazy roads, but I think people really do have good intentions. And I believe like Jerome Powell, I mean, he's given like Nixon, even for really quick, Nixon, he was given a terrible, like, what else is he going to do? People always like give Nixon like, well, he took us off the gold standards. Like, well, what was he supposed to do? You know, like, I don't know what else was, you know, he was given this system from 50 years ago, 60 years ago from the Fed and on and on and on. And what FDR did, it's like, well, he was just a guy at that moment. Jerome Powell's the same way. And all these people, they just kind of get given this, and I got a question. Some of them are like, why do you want this job? You know, like that type of thing. But it's just like, what do you expect them to do? But it's up to us to kind of, like you said, that trust isn't there. You know, that job is fruitless. So like, why am I paying attention to what this guy is doing? Because it's a dead end road. So again, I think it's really important to just understand some of the nuances in the back stories, the context of what's going on here, because otherwise it's very, again, like this thing, like we have many people, we all do in our life where, well, I just thought that they had our best intentions at heart. It's like, really? You know, like, have you not read a history book? Do you not understand psychology or human nature or anything? So anyway, it's, again, not to continue going on, but any thoughts there would be
great. Man. No, you said a lot of awesome stuff there. One thing that comes to mind is just this, and it's a little more philosophical in nature, but this idea of just like more simplistic pleasure seeking, I'll call it, versus I'm not sure what the right terminology
Like
would be,
high
but
time
like,
preference almost,
yeah,
right?
it's
Versus,
kind of,
yeah.
it kind of gets into a high time preference versus low time
Yes.
preference thing. And like real satisfaction, fulfillment. I think you said something about, building your skills and actually getting
Yep.
good at something versus that just like seeking short-term pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is something that society needs more people telling others, younger people, probably younger men in particular. We need more people explaining this to them, the differences between these two things. And I'm glad you mentioned time preference, because I think this does get into time preference. But before I say that, I will just mention one thing. There's a guy out there named Alan Watts, who I'm a huge fan of. He's passed away at this point, but he was originally British guy, but he went out to eat. So he grew up in a Western, Christian culture, but he went out to Eastern cultures, Buddhism, Taoism, etc., and kind of came back, and he was able to explain them for a Western audience. So his like communication's really good. But one thing that he turned me on, one of the many things he turned me on to, was he pointed out this idea that discipline, to a lot of young kids, they don't like that word. They don't like discipline. They want to be like a free spirit or something like that.
Yep.
And he just put out the idea that discipline is actually tied to skill building. Like learning a discipline is like learning a skill. Jocko Willink has the term, I think he says, discipline equals freedom. So
great book.
I think all of that is really important to keep in mind. And this gets into the lower time preference. So you have a longer term time horizon. If you're focused on building skills for yourself, getting good at things, you will have such a better shot at what I would call true happiness or fulfillment in life. But I think where people get tripped up is when we talk about a lot of, it's like a meme in our society is like, do what makes you happy. And me being like this hyper rational, analytical person I am, every time I've heard that, I always thought to myself, okay, do what makes me happy. What if it makes me happy for like a week and then it's lost? What if it makes me happy for a month and then it's lost? Like, you have to have a time frame here, because if you're just like seeking this short-term pleasure, that's more like the Dan Bilzerian mindset. You might be absolutely miserable a year from now or 10 years from now. So one of the many reasons why I think Bitcoiners have a good mindset is we focus on this low time preference versus high time preference thing. So yeah, those are some of the thoughts that come to mind based on some of the things you said, but you hit on so many awesome topics. I think I'm forgetting about some of them now, but you tell me where you want to go from here. I have other tweets I pulled up that we were, as we were talking about topics, but you tell me where you want to go.
Yeah, no, we can go over those in a second. And honestly, I know we've, got 15, 20 minutes. We can, the commodity money versus credit and stuff. We'll have to bump that maybe to next one. We'll lead into that probably at the end, and maybe talk about that, maybe just more deep dive into that next time. So I want to keep kind of going down some of the rabbit holes we're in right now. And yeah, just about the primal nature of people and just the intention of, I think a lot of the people in government are or did go there. I think a lot of them turned, because this is where, again, the conspiracy theorist type of stuff, which, hey, I'm the leader of that club, which I really actually don't think there are conspiracy theories. It's just people not telling, being transparent and truthful, right? There's no such thing really as a conspiracy theory. It's just, hey, you haven't showed me, you haven't proved to me something, right? People would say that about anything, fiat money, everything, or fiat currencies, everything. It's all a conspiracy theory, because I have no idea how much is out there. It's all a conspiracy. Like, who knows? So this nature of humans, though, and this is where I think, again, Bitcoiners understand this. And I'm going to lead into something else here in a second, but it's, Bitcoiners truly understand it's broken all those models, but we, now I lost my train of thought, but the models are all broken, so what I think is hilarious, I don't know if it was Nolan Bowerley talking about this or someone else had talked about this, when they were just saying that nothing that like an economic analyst or like even Wall Street, I think it was Wall Street actually. So this is, this is why I want to bring this up with you here too, that anything before like, 2020, I think he was saying 2020, everything before that, nothing that a Wall Street analyst wrote or anything is at all viable today. Like a Bitcoiner, all of the content that Bitcoiners put out is viable for all time. Like those principles stand true because it's first principles. It's always going to stand the test of time. Where like if you look at a Wall Street analyst, or like you're going to, Market Watch, right? Like, oh, what does the analyst say? It's all this like this fiat, kind of like Krugman, kind of coming full circle like that. Krugman, like it's just constant like short time, or low time preference, or high time preference, short term thinking is YOLO type thinking, where it's just constantly being proven wrong, like daily almost. Where Bitcoiners, because they're thinking in 10,000 year segments, Bitcoin's exposing all that. Bitcoiners see that very clearly, and I think it goes back to, oh, I know what I was going to say earlier, which was the Dan Bilzerian thing, and just even politicians. It's politicians, most of them go there, but because of human nature, you want to, like, we all want to be accepted in some way, status. We want acceptance in some way. So like you go to DC and you might be like the best person on earth. You might be the best person, but it doesn't matter. Like you are who you surround yourself with. So you're surrounded by a bunch of morons. It doesn't matter because you will start becoming that person. And you want the rooftop party. Like you don't want to be the only person who's not at the party after the vote, and like, oh, we're all hanging out. So naturally you'd start gearing everyone towards everyone wanting this certain thing and enriching themselves there, because it's just natural. Like, well, how do I get ahead? Well, this person, that person, that person. Well, I'm not going to be in that committee. Well, I'm not going to do this. And so it's natural. Like you don't blame these people, but it's because we put so much trust and so much centralization, and we federalize everything instead of having states having power and decentralizing everything, that we ultimately have given ourselves this. So it's not like one person's fault. It's not, a certain sect of people or anything. It's just human nature coming back to, the founding fathers knew this. This is why we are set up a certain way. And what Bitcoiners truly know at the end of the day, which is you have to have trustless money, rules, not rulers. So anyway, that was kind of like me coming full circle with all my brain thoughts of kind of what we're talking about. But that's how I think this all kind of comes together. And Bitcoiners seeing, hey, this stands the test of time. The principles, the models will always stand the test of time. The content we put out, like 10 years from now, what we are talking about will, not being conceited in any way, but talking first principles and what we're doing will still stand 10 years from now or 20 years from now, where Krugman, his stuff daily is old news. It doesn't stand the test of time anymore. So anyway, thoughts?
Love that. Yeah. I love this idea that the stuff that Bitcoiners are putting out is first principles thinking, and therefore you could look back at it years from now and actually get some. Yeah. I really do like that, the way you put that. And I think it's critical because I saw firsthand on Wall Street for so many years that when it came to first principles thinking about the history of money, the nature of money, and the current monetary system, that was really just absent from Wall Street. And it was, we talked about, some of this last time, but it's absent from the education system, all from first grade all the way up to 12th grade. It's absent from college. And once you get a job in traditional finance, it's absent from your career on Wall Street. So, and why is that a problem? Why do we even need first principles thinking? The answer I think is obvious, is you end up getting into some really bad systems if you skip over that part. Whatever analogy you want to use, it's building your house on sand rather than building it on rock. And that you can't skip over the first principles thinking. It's not optional. And I think Bitcoiners do a much better job and Austrian economists do a much better job in breaking it down and saying, let's do this from the simplest point. You've got a basic society. This is how money gets introduced. This is how it works into the rest of the economy. I just think Bitcoiners do a much better job at that than any other mainstream group out there.
Yeah, I can't wait to talk more about that. Like, Socratic method, Cafe Bitcoin is that in a way, right? Everyone kind of gets up, and it can be a firing squad at times, right? And it'll be Joe will come up and he'll battle with any of us, in which we appreciate that. And it's the only way you learn. It's everyone. It's wicked, right? There's a lot of guys up there who aren't afraid to toss around the ideas, and I think Bitcoiners in general kind of feel that, and we realize that even people who aren't inclined to necessarily be out there debating, I think Bitcoiners in general just realize, hey, we need more of that. You need that. And it kind of forces everyone to be a little bit more forthright in like their thoughts, and distilling things down to like, okay, what am I thinking? And is it wrong? Or and something I made a note to earlier. I said they don't want panic. By the way, I want to clarify, because I know someone will say, well, they do want panic. I do believe the powers that be they want panic, because I think that they want to scare and fear monger and things like that, but they want it in the way they want it. They want panic right at the certain times in certain places for their reasons. So anyway, that was just a quick note I saw, because I remember I was saying that, and I was like, yeah, they definitely want panic, because you had mentioned this earlier, right? They want probably a little more centralization. We keep seeing this dominoes over the years, right? For decades of just more and more centralization over time. So anyway, comment on any of that. But the other thing I wanted to kind of get into with the last, 10 minutes or so as well, a little bit here, but kind of finishing up even some of what's going on right now and leading into commodity money versus commodity or commodity money versus credit and stuff like that, and what kind of some of those answers are more maybe next time. But because right now the debt, I think one of the big things, and I asked you this a little bit ago, which is what do the next 6-12 months look like? If they have the rates like this, I mean, I can't help but feeling like there's going to be more collapses, whether it's banks, could be countries, more Sri Lanka's, the pound, collapsing, was that mid to end of last year, stuff like that. It just feels like that with the debt, and you can speak to this, is my question being, what does that debt situation look like, the rollover? Because we haven't even, like, whether it's commercial real estate, like a lot of that rollover hasn't even taken place yet into some of these higher rates, obviously. So what are your thoughts behind the coming months and quarters of just like, what does that picture look like to you in your mind from what you see of when these things start rolling over, and when is that going to be more taking place? Is it the next 6 months or 12 months? I kind of have an idea, but what are your what's your sentiment there and some of your thought on that?
Yeah. So the punchline would be, I do believe that all roads lead to some form of currency debasement. And I'm a believer in a line which I heard recently. People probably have different variations of this, but it's easier to forecast 5 years from now than it is to forecast 5 months from now. So
true.
I'm a big believer in that. And I think it's important because you don't want to get too attached to your own short-term predictions, whether they be about economic growth, whether they be about the price of Bitcoin, the price of some other asset, whatever. It is tough to predict when things are going to happen. And just one quick example on that, like Peter Schiff, he's kind of become a whipping boy for the Bitcoin community in a funnier way than Krugman. Krugman actually frustrates me. With Peter Schiff, it's like, it's kind of funny, it's kind of hokey, whatever. But Peter Schiff
owns Bitcoin. Let's be honest. He owns Bitcoin.
Yeah, he must,
yeah,
right?
He does. Great marketer.
Yeah, but he was correct about plug into YouTube. Peter Schiff was right. For anyone who wants to see some of the YouTube videos of him leading up to the financial crisis, he was correct going back to like the early 2000s. He was calling some of this stuff like almost like the guy had a time machine. That's how
Schiff is brilliant. He's one of the smartest guys out there, quite honestly, I believe. Krugman is like intellectually bankrupt. I don't know what's going on there, but Schiff is beyond smart, super smart.
Yeah. I a lot of respect for Schiff. He's written a bunch of books that helped me a ton. Mm-hmm. But with him, the reason I brought him up is just because he was correct in his assessment of what was going on with the housing crisis. It just took 5, 6, 7 years to play out. And in that whole time, people are literally laughing at him on mainstream television. So I just bring that up as a fairly recent example of someone who had the fundamentals down pat. He had the explanation, the reasoning down, but it took a while for it to play out. So look, with that in mind, what, I think is important to keep an eye on in terms of like the debt situation, what's happening in terms of debt rolling over. I have a few interesting stats here that we could look at. So one is the amount of debt in 3 years' time, the running percentage of maturities of everything the U.S. has outstanding. In 3 years, 50% of the debt rolls over. Jeez. In 1 year, it's about 30%. In 2 years, it's about 42%. And again, 3 years, it's 50% of the debt rolls over. So if you believe that, and by the way, the average interest rate, this is like relatively recent data. It's probably as of a few months ago. It might be as of the end of 2022. The average interest rate is like 2.5%. So if you believe that, yeah, if the US has to roll over its debt, and if you believe the average interest rate of what they're going to roll it into is something like, I don't know, 4 or 5%, because the yield curve right now, it's, 5 at the front, and then it gets down to like 3.5, call it, at the back end of the curve. It's going to be somewhere around 3.5 to 4.5% is where they're going to roll it over. And if you look at what the US government spends their money on, as of fiscal year 22, the largest line item was 1.2 trillion in Social Security. Then the second one in this particular breakdown, I'm looking at 900 billion in what they call health. I guess actually Medicare is broken out separately. Then there's, Social Security, things like that. 750 billion, call it, is national defense. 750, 800 billion. The point here I'm making is, very soon, when they roll over more debt at higher interest rates, the single largest expense for the US government will be interest on the debt. And you have to ask yourself, is this debt going to get paid back in any kind of real way, meaning they actually pay debt and stop going into more debt? Or do they just go into more? You take out debt to pay back your debt. And if that sounds like a bad strategy to anyone, that's because it is not a realistic, sustainable strategy. So if you're a holder of treasuries, looking at that, whether you are an individual, whether you're a company, sovereign wealth fund, a foreign nation, whatever, you're looking at that and you're probably saying, why do I want to own these treasuries? And I don't want to be too alarmist. I don't think it's like Japan and China are going to sell all of their treasuries tomorrow. That's a bit too extreme. But these people who've been big buyers for the last several decades of treasuries, they're not going to buy as much on the margin. And you have to start to look at what are other entities that might buy them. Is it going to be pension funds, insurance companies? Banks is an interesting one, because the banks just bought a ton of treasuries, and how did that turn out for them? It didn't really go so well. I do think the Fed is going to try to stuff banks with more treasuries in the coming years. But the point I'm trying to make here is that when I see debt going where it's going, when I see interest expense going where it's going, I don't see any scenario where the Fed can truly back off and say, we're doing QT, we're shrinking the balance sheet down to, 3-4 trillion, and we're just not going to be buyers of treasuries anymore. I can see them, they're obviously trying to do that now. That's their narrative that they're selling right now. I can see them doing that for a short period of time, a year, 2, maybe 3 at a time. But on a longer term time horizon, I think the Fed has to get involved, because other buyers of treasuries will not be there. And we're not cutting spending anytime soon. And that's kind of the situation I see. And every time the Fed does get involved with buying more treasuries, it alerts more people to the fact that this is not a sustainable system. The dollar's being debased. It's just continuous. It is money printing when the Fed buys treasuries. And when the government is just issuing more and more treasuries every year, and the debt's going to go from 30 trillion to 50 trillion to 100 trillion, when people see that that's the path we're on, they will say, I need to get out of something that is not a dollar denominated asset. I need to get out of dollar denominated assets into something that is outside that system. Obviously, I'm referring to Bitcoin. So I know I said a ton there, but that's kind of my longer term picture for the macro situation. I think all roads lead to currency debasement. Do we see that accelerate like within a few months? It's possible. It might take a few years to play out as well, but I think that's the definite path that we're on.
Man, yeah, thank you for that breakdown. It's a crazy time. It just, again, makes me think of so many questions. Number one, just a statement. I really believe that every day that goes by that Bitcoin will be the top thing. Maybe it's top 3 topics, but it's going to be a massive topic, I think, in the presidential election 18 months from now. Because that's you think about how long that is from now, actually. So it's a long time until then, and we're already seeing it with anti-CBDC talk from, whether it's Trump and DeSantis, or you've got actual Bitcoin talk from RFK and Vivek. It's wild, absolutely wild, and this only speeds up. To your point, more debasement has to be, and similar to. I know, Lynn has been talking about this a lot, right? Like the 40s style financial repression, basically, right? Where it's just you have to debase. There's no way. Leading to my big question to you is, what do you think when this happens? So like, we've already had a lot of buyers kind of step away from the treasury auctions and stuff like that, the big guys are in China or whatever. But when people are dumping those, and they stepped away from the auctions, they're dumping those like crazy, and the rates are going through the roof. I mean, my thought is, how high can they go? How fast? And what does that spur on? It's just the Fed, like you already kind of answered in a way, but the Fed just stepping in, I guess, into what overdrive and just buying treasuries like crazy. I mean, what are your thoughts? I mean, like, this is just wild, absolutely wild.
Yeah,
which is massive debasement, right? I mean, so yeah, thoughts on that?
I think they will do everything they can to not make it be a repeat of COVID, which was the Treasury issues literally trillions of dollars in new spending, and the Fed buys most of it. Is just objectively what happened during COVID, and they did it quickly. If I remember correctly, it was the Fed increased their balance sheet by rough numbers, $1 trillion in 3 weeks, and then by $3 trillion in 3 months. I'm almost sure I have that correct. But you could look at the Fed's balance sheet in March to June of 2020. It's a almost a straight line up. So that is debt monetization, just objectively speaking. I think they will do what they can to avoid doing that again, because I think they're aware that enough people would kind of call them out on their BS for doing that. So I think what's more likely to happen is they're going to paper over these problems, kind of like what we saw with the BTFP, Bank Term Funding Program. They come up with this like targeted, specific approach where they say, okay, here's this problem. It's kind of like throwing duct tape over a hole of a boat. It's like, okay, there's this problem, but instead of like replacing the whole boat, we're going to slap some duct tape on it and just like kind of move on and pretend like it's not a big deal. I think that's what they're going to try to do in the coming years, with the big exception being if there is some sort of gigantic crisis, which 2008 was one, and then COVID was one, because all these companies would have went bankrupt if they didn't have government support, because they got shut down and they couldn't fund their debt. And it would have been a terrible knock-on effect for the financial system. I'm not excusing what they did, but that I'm saying that's what allowed them to go so big.
Yep.
And I think there would need to be something of that kind of magnitude for them to say, okay, everyone, we did, with the Fed increased its balance sheet by 3 to 4 trillion during COVID. This time it's going up by 10 trillion, and the federal government is, doing a spending plan for 15 trillion, and the Fed's going to buy 10 of it. I think that's in the cards, but it would take some sort of huge crisis for them to be able to actually do that.
Stuff just locking up, I would imagine, some kind of credit, just everything freezing, like, do you think it would be something like that?
I think and this gets really speculative. I think it's an interesting conversation, but I just do it is like very speculative. So this is not like high confidence anything. I think even the market seizing up type stuff would be like, they would try to slap duct tape on it, and it'd be like a few $100 billion of QE here and there. I think it might need to be something more external, like maybe a conflict with China, China invades Taiwan, or
cyber pandemic.
Cyber pandemic type thing, and we need to spend trillions and trillions of dollars, because oh my gosh, look at this big threat. Maybe I'm being too anchored to COVID, because that's kind of what happened during COVID. It was like,
they have telegraphed it, though.
Scared.
Yeah. I mean, it's not us talking about that. I mean, they've talked about it. So yeah, man,
it's a possibility. Yeah.
Absolutely wild. I know we got to get rolling here. So it's a good place to kind of roll this out anyway and kind of lead into our, commodity money versus credit and kind of pick this up a little bit next time and see where we're at maybe in a month or so, like after, Bitcoin Miami and a lot of that stuff, and just like, pick it up in 3, 4, 5 weeks and see where we're at and get into the commodity money versus credit and stuff, and your article there, which people have to go check out before they watch part 3. But really quick before we go, what are your thoughts on Brad Sherman? I got to know your thoughts on Brad Sherman exposing what I mean. Well, I guess what Bitcoiners know, but literally just saying the truth out loud and then just like laughing in everyone's face. I mean, just truly mind blowing stuff. What's your quick 30-second thought on that?
So the clip I saw, maybe it wasn't the full one, but I did see the clip of him saying crypto bros create money out of thin air. And then he said, and you know what? Maybe they say the government creates money out of thin air. And he goes, and maybe we do, but we're the U.S. government. That's what I heard. I don't know if there was more behind it or
that's
something.
All I saw.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think he's kind of opening the door to these different debates. There actually is a faction of people that says, yes, the U.S. government creates money out of thin air, but it's okay that they do it. And Bitcoiners obviously reject that. We think it's a form of theft. When you create money out of thin air, you objectively are taking wealth, you're confiscating it from other dollar holders. Brad Sherman thinks that's okay if the federal government does it. Obviously, as a Bitcoiner, I don't think that's okay. Maybe the positive spin on this is it's a good thing, because there's probably a lot of people out there who don't follow anything to do with Bitcoin. Maybe they heard Brad Sherman say that, and maybe that was literally the first time they heard that this quasi-government banking relationship does create money out of thin air. And maybe, as most natural people hear that, and maybe they're saying, wait a minute, creating money out of thin air is not a good thing. Maybe that'll be their trigger to look into Bitcoin. That would be one positive way to look at it.
Hey, all roads lead to Bitcoin, right? It's the beauty of Bitcoin aligning all incentives, and that's why all the roads lead to Bitcoin, which is, I guess, that's the circle. I guess you have to go down. I guess the drain you have to go down. Ironically, so all things are good for Bitcoin, and everything is all good news. All bad news is so absolutely amazing. Thank you, brother. Thanks for coming here. I think a little over an hour, but I know we got to go and you got to roll. What are you working on right now? Next articles, projects. What are you guys working on right now? Quick before we roll this out.
Yeah, at this point, Bitcoin Miami is obviously a huge focus. There's going to be a decent Swan presence there, just given it is such a big Bitcoin conference. I won't be there myself. I got a conflicting event I have to attend, but I think that'll be awesome. A lot of Bitcoiners together. So, I'm excited for anyone who's attending. I'm sure they'll have a great time. And then otherwise, Swan is just working on a ton of different things. Our Swan private channel, Swan business, Swan advisor. We're launching Swan custody later this year. We've got Swan IRA. There's probably some stuff that I'm not even thinking of off the top of my head, but bulk of the time is spent talking to clients of Swan for me, and trying to write some content and speak some content on Cafe Bitcoin when I'm on there. So that's kind of the name of the game right now.
Absolutely love it. Thank you. Part 2. Where can everyone find you?
Twitter handle is John_@_Swan. And now that I'm, at Swan and not at a Wall Street bank, I am fairly active on Twitter, trying to get even more active. So that's the best place to find me.
Love it, man. Looking forward to part 3, and I will see you soon.
Yes. Thank you. Great to be on.
Thanks, brother.
Whew, wow. Another incredible hour with John. And anytime we get to spend time with a playable character, I learned something. I don't know about you, but I learned something. And that's the coolest part about being in the Bitcoin space. The sound money space is great, and you learn stuff. I was in that space with the gold bugs and stuff like that. I know John was as well. But when you're in the Bitcoin space, you are learning things every day. I've never seen anything like it in my life. Formal education didn't do that for me. The gold space, the political space, all these spaces I've been in, the hockey space, I did not learn something new every day. But in Bitcoin, if you are plugged in, you are learning something every single day. And John is the epitome of that. Going from college to Wall Street, and then working at Swan Bitcoin in the Bitcoin space and seeing this progression in his own life, and one that mirrored similar to what mine was. So I appreciate John coming on and being a playable character and being someone we can trust, we can count on, and we can also confide in, and we can also learn from. We are looking for anyone that you may know that is a critical thinker, that can actually think for themselves, can hold two opposing opinions in their head at the same time. Those are the kind of people we want on here. Those are the playable characters, the people that can actually change how they see the world. I know I've done that to about half dozen to a dozen big things over the last 20 years. I've changed my mind on big things. So I appreciate John coming on again. Please let us know what you would like us to see covered in the future and who else you'd like to see us have on. Please go visit John. He works for Swan Bitcoin. Visit John on Twitter, on Nostr. Check out some of his articles. We'll be linked in here. And we look forward to seeing you on the next one.